In this lecture, we are going to load a schema for our JSON file. Schemas are optional, but they're incredibly helpful for avoiding spelling errors and debugging. To find out why, let's open the theme.json file in our editors. Next, let's add an object with a property called version. The first property in your theme.json file should always be version. WordPress is constantly evolving. However, it tries its best to be backward compatible. The settings of the theme.json file have changed over time. The early adopters may still be using an older version of the theme.json file. Therefore, we need to tell WordPress what version we'll be using. The latest version is 2. The value for this property should be a number. So far, so good. However, it's possible we may have made a mistake. For example, what if we capitalized the V in the property name? Property names are case sensitive. WordPress will not be able to detect the version of our property. Let's try creating another problem. Instead of a number, let's wrap our value in quotes. Our JSON file has 2 errors. Unfortunately, they will go unnoticed. Neither WordPress nor our editor will inform us of our mistakes. For these reasons, we should use a schema. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the documentation page for the schema. According to the documentation, a schema is available to help us address these issues. Schemas are not specific to WordPress. They apply to all JSON files. The purpose of a schema is to double-check your properties and values. A schema can help the editor understand the structure of a JSON file. They can validate a JSON file. If you make a mistake, an error will notify you of your mistake. A schema can be applied to a JSON file by adding the $schema property. The documentation provides an example that we can copy. Let's grab it. Next, let's paste it at the top of our object in the theme.json file. Be sure to add a comma. After adding this property, Visual Studio Code should begin validating your file. For some of you, this may work immediately. For others, you may receive an error. This error will appear if the editor is unable to download the schema. There are 2 solutions for fixing this issue. The first solution is to convert the URL from the HTTPS to HTTP. However, you may not be comfortable with the idea of using an unsecured connection. An alternative solution is to grab the full URL. The URL provided by the WordPress documentation is a proxy URL. To better understand, let's click on the link. In our browser, the URL will redirect us to a GitHub page. The URL in the address bar is completely different from the URL provided by the documentation. This URL is the true location for the schema. Rather than using the documentation's URL, we can switch over to the true URL. Our editor will be able to grab the schema. By doing so, it'll be able to validate our JSON file. There are 2 new errors that haven't been there before. If we hover our mouse over the opening curly brackets, the error will state our file is missing the version property. Sounds strange, right? The version property exists in our file. However, look closely at the casing. The original name has all lowercase letters, whereas our property has a capitalized V. It becomes clear as to what's wrong. The names don't match. Let's quickly fix the casing. After making those adjustments, the errors have gone away. Perfect. Well, almost. Another error has appeared. This time, the error is related to the value. According to the error, the type is incorrect. The data type for the version property should be an integer. Let's remove the quotes from the number. Voila! Our file is error-free. Prior to adding the schema, these errors remained undetected. While optional, schemas are incredibly valuable for developers. They allow us to quickly debug our JSON files. This reduces the likelihood of WordPress not understanding our settings. I highly recommend keeping the schema option in your file. In the next lecture, let's continue with extending the global styles for our theme.